I suggest that we start our session. The subject is what Europe should chief executives prepare for. And I think there are, under this very general title, a number of issues. Nobody disputes Europe is a single market and is becoming ever and ever more so. It is enlarging as a single market this year, and it is a very important element. And I would want to add that the single market is something which is not completely definitive. That is, we still do not have a single European currency for the whole of the single market, and we still have a number of differences within Europe in prices and taxes, etc., which I would say limit the scope of this single market. But on the fact that Europe is and will become more and more in single markets, there is an agreement. Second point is that Europe ambitions to become, and I quote the Lisbon Agenda, the world's most competitive, knowledge-based, growth-oriented economy, which means introducing some form of economic governance to bring about this growth, be it either through macroeconomic policies or through microeconomic policies, for example, in favor of infrastructures, telecommunication, research and development, higher education, and so forth. And there, clearly, we feel that, and at least I feel that today, Europe has some difficulty in achieving this. Third point, which is very much a question mark, is will Europe be a world player or even more a world power? And I believe that on this third question, there is not even an agreement on what Europe should be. To address this issue, we have a panel made of 5 persons, and I will give the names in the order in which they will speak. The first one is Pat Cox, who is President of the European Parliament and who will introduce Europe for all of us. And then we have the presidents of 2 new members of Europe, or future new members, President Drnovsek of Slovenia, who has, I would say, almost watched over the development of this country, which is sometimes called the Switzerland of Europe, a country in which Renault has invested, and I must say Renault believes is a very developed and efficient economy. President Kwasniewski of Poland, who is for many the symbol of New Europe, and maybe we will have an opportunity to address what this means, but it is the largest country now to join Europe, and it is for Europe politically and economically very important. We will then have a representative of the business community, Mr. Zumwinkel, Chief Executive of Deutsche Post World, who has over 15 years transformed public service in a worldwide company. And lastly, we will have a challenger from the United States, Mr. Kagan, who is a scholar, publisher, and an expert on foreign affairs. The rules of the game is that every speaker will speak 6 minutes. We have an open debate, and as we are fostering democracy in Europe, there will be a vote at one point in the session on 3 questions, and you will be allowed to give your opinion. As it is not a full democracy, the questions are predefined, and you are only authorized to say yes to 1 of 3 statements. So, with this, I give the floor to Pat Cox.
Thank you very much indeed. We had a debate already which was very European about whether Aleksander Kwasniewski, Janez, Drnovsek or myself should begin. And they proved that they're the new Europeans because they said you should go first. Indeed, President Kwasniewski proves new European because he's the only one of the three of us who speak politically who follows the rules of engagement, which appear to have changed here. He's not wearing the tie, so I congratulate him already on beating the rest of Europe to the informality of Davos. If I should characterise the few points I want to make to you, I would do them by first telling you a little story. Recently, John Major gave an interview which hasn't yet been broadcast on Irish television to a well-known and popular Irish broadcaster, and he told a story. The story was that he had invited Boris Yeltsin to Chequers, the country residence of the British Prime Minister, that he had asked with the assistance of an interpreter, Boris Yeltsin, he said, "Boris, please, in one word, tell me, how are things in Russia?" And Boris answered, "Good." And then Major thought and reflection, this was too severe. He said, "Boris," with the interpreter, in more than one word, tell me how are things in Russia. Boris said, "Not good." Now, if I stopped here, I think I would have already comprehensively answered the challenge of what I should bring to this debate. On the economic part, and our chairman's introductory remark in a certain way has touched on many of these questions, I think the European report card at this stage is a mixed report. I think the European Union, with its enlargement, has the most powerfully positive thing that we have done together on the continent in the past decade, and gives us a platform for stability and opportunity of an unparalleled quality and real business opportunity, since we speak about the impact for business in particular. The single market, and it's not yet complete, particularly in services, also in financial services, is nonetheless going to touch 450 million citizen consumers and under similar rules of engagement, if I may use that phrase, and that is a powerful and positive impetus, I believe, for all of us. The Union, as you know, has the right to represent the states subject to mandates in trade negotiations, and I strongly hope the Union will mobilise itself to be a positive force in Doha and to get that back on the agenda. Thirdly, on the economic part in respect of the Lisbon agenda, at this stage, I think what we need, and we need it especially from our states, we need it especially at the March summit meeting in Brussels, less conclusions and more outcomes. We're worn out with conclusions. If I wheeled in the conclusions from the spring summits of the last several years, they would probably be higher than the highest peak surrounding Davos. But in terms of the achievements, you'd have to go down to the lowest valley to get the outcome. This isn't good enough. We need more attitude and delivery and less platitude. So the aspiration capacity gap is exposed there. On the good news side, the larger continental economies have begun more seriously to focus on reform, and I welcome that. The German reform programme, and there's a big debate about is it fast enough, far enough, deep enough, at least it's now happening. It wasn't happening 2 years ago, it wasn't happening 1 year ago. Similar debates in France and Italy, and these structural reforms to do with both demography, public finance, globalisation, new trends in labour markets, cannot be swept under the carpet and are indispensable to Europe and business. On the wider strategic questions, there are three big issues coming up on the European calendar this year. And let me make a quick back reference. I think last year was excellent in terms of progress on enlargement, a big positive, not good in terms of three other issues. Europe's Iraqi crisis exposed still the aspirations capacity gap to do with common foreign policy making and to do with delivering outcomes. Secondly, the debate, I don't have time to go into it in headline terms now, on the Stability Culture and Stability and Growth Pact wasn't Europe's finest hour, however you approach the debate, and we need a stability culture, whatever about the specific rules that are there to do with proper governance and management of our economy. And thirdly, the failure in Brussels to deliver a constitutional treaty. Now, all of these things are leftovers from last year in terms of atmosphere. This is a year of renewal. New Parliament, new President of Commission, new Commission later in November. In all of these areas, let me conflate three things that are difficult. The constitutional treaty we need to answer what is Europe's competence to do things going forward, and we in the Parliament want to see it in the form that has been suggested, foreign minister, security and defence obligations and so on, to be taken up more seriously. Better organisation through a presidency of the Council. Secondly, we have in this conflation of events, the other capacity question: what budget will Europe have to act? And frankly, if we have a more complex Europe, with more regional diversity, with more foreign policy challenges, with more solidarity challenges internally and externally, do we really believe we can do it on the cheap? I've got a big problem with the way that debate is emerging, not to have a profligate expenditure at a European level, but to understand you get nothing for nothing. Are we prepared to invest in a vision of Europe as a real player? That debate starts happening from 10 February. Thirdly, in this debate, I think conflating the question about Turkey in December next year, I don't want to go all through it, but that's another identity question. What is Europe in terms of boundary, geography, history, values, etc.? So in all of those, that conflation of what is Europe arrives at some existential moment of definition this year. I think we need to sequence these things. If we try to answer all of these kinds of things at once, I think the burden is too heavy to lift. And then, if I may make just a final reflection, I hope I'm not cheating on the time, on the foreign policy questions, a few numbers that might just help to delineate some things. The EU 15, not as EU, separately as 15, in the sum of their parts, spend less than half the United States on defence expenditure each year. For that, we get about 1/10 of the capacity to act. That's very bad value for money. Even if we don't spend more, we really have got to work hard to spend better. Secondly, the EU, that's to say its member states and the Union itself, contribute more than half of all the contributions to UN financially, more than half of all the peacekeeping forces in terms of substance, and more than 60% in terms of international development assistance and humanitarian aid. We believe in the Kyoto process, it has a UN base. We believe in the International Criminal Court, it has a UN base. So in all of these, we are committed multilateralists, and that won't change in the decade. But we've got to be committed then to effective multilateralism, a UN that isn't a recipe not to act, a UN that has the capacity to act and to get some European delivery. My summary at the end, to go back to Yeltsin, is it good, not good? No, my own sense, if I have to give you a pitch, it's good, but it could be better.
Thank you very much. President Drnovsek.
So, my friends already outlined the most important issues. European Constitutional Treaty. It's quite a problem. The last year would be much better if the work would have been accomplished in Brussels in December. But this leftover is it's not easy to digest, and I think that we will have some problems. But I think by the year 2014, this is the question we have today, what will European Union look like in 2014? I think we will have the Constitutional Treaty. But when before?
We will not vote on that.
When before, perhaps my friend Aleksander Kwasniewski could tell us more. I think many cards now are in the hands of the Poland. But I would like to answer the dilemma or the question which was in the air. Is the Europe of two speeds viable? Is this an alternative? If there is a problem with constitutional treaty, should some countries go faster? I think this is not a good solution. This is not a solution for Europe. This would change the concept. This would bring in new tensions in Europe. And certainly European Union would not be a player, such a player on the world stage if the developments would go in this direction. So I think that undoubtedly we have to work on European treaty, on this concept, and the solution should be found. I hope that probably not before Spanish elections, but I hope that before Polish elections in 2005, because after 2005, perhaps this gap would be would go too far. Second issue, Lisbon process, economy, competitiveness. I agree that with Mr. Schweitzer, that the results now are not at the level, are not adequate to achieve the objectives from Lisbon. Economic developments are not good enough. There are different factors, but I would outline one of them. European budget, EU budget, and agriculture policy. This is for far the largest item in European budget. And while the European Union will subsidize its agriculture as the main priority, I doubt that we will catch up with the United States and some other countries in competitiveness in general economic developments. I think that politically it's difficult, especially for some countries, but priorities should be changed. And also, speaking on the world scale, subsidizing agriculture, protectionism that Europe advocates or practices together with the United States distorts also the trade in the world and distorts especially agriculture in developing countries. So I think that something more should be done in this field, some more serious commitment and more ambitious as we see it now in preparations for the budget 2006-2013. So I hope that in 2014 we will have some better position here as we have now. Speaking about European foreign policy, will Europe speak with one vote in 10 years' time from now? I doubt. I don't think so. But I think it will be better than now. If constitutional treaty is accepted, if there is a president, European Union, and foreign minister, and probably more coordination, and a lot of patience, I think that European Union will gradually speak more coordinated. Will not yet only with one voice, but a situation could be better. And here, perhaps it would be counterproductive to expect too much too soon. Developments must go on. Countries somehow must accept it by themselves. It cannot be enforced. Defense policy, probably it will be a little better than now in 10 years, but not much. In economic situation as we have in the European Union, in most EU countries, I don't expect that defense budget will increase significantly. It means that the gap between the United States and European Union will increase, speaking about military capacities. European Union will not be a military superpower in 10 years. This is very clear. Probably we will organize our forces better. They will be more capable to confront the so-called asymmetric risks, but certainly far behind the United States. And next question, enlargement. Will enlargement proceed, continue? There is certain enlargement fatigue, I guess, now in the European Union after accepting 10 countries and now without constitutional treaty at the moment, which was meant also to facilitate decision process and many other things. But I think that enlargement will continue. I expect that Romania, Bulgaria, and probably Croatia and Turkey will be members by 2014. Probably not more, I guess. But the others, other countries of the so-called Western Balkan and Eastern Europe should have European perspective. Otherwise, democratic and economic developments in those countries will worsen significantly. At the end, what will be the role of European Union on the world scene? I don't see European Union as a project that would be counterweight to United States. As I said, militarily, European Union will not play a very important role. It will play important role in policekeeping, in peacekeeping operations, but otherwise I expect that NATO will remain the main framework for the cooperation between United States and European countries. But I guess that United States will probably sometimes attach more importance to ad hoc coalitions for specific tasks, like now in Iraq, where it seems that for them, the coalition of the countries which are there is probably at the moment more important than other alliances. The European Union can have an important role enhancing, or let's say, enhancing environment issues, enhancing trade in the world. But about environment, only one remark. Kyoto Agreement is implemented in European Union, but it is not in United States, not in China, and not in Russia. Russia will not ratify it, as it seems. So,
Russia promised in Johannesburg they will not.
but now they said, recently they said that they will not yet. So it is not.
In Milan, they said
Yeah.
something in between.
Yeah, in December they said not. But okay, Kyoto is not in force, Kyoto Agreement. And Americans, they do not apply, they do not follow it, but they develop new technologies for environment protection. So it is very possible that they invest these resources in new technologies, and they will get advance in certain time over European Union, also in environment policy. I think that here EU should reconsider the whole situation, as it is with Kyoto Protocol, and how should it direct itself for the future. Is it the best situation, possible situation, as we have now? Because this also has some impact on competitiveness, and the question is what we get out of it. Do we get enough? So, concluding, EU can play also a moral role in the world, can introduce, or let's say, can spread European values, which are important. With European Constitution, this will be even more clear. So I think that today, no more United States, but European Union can be the leading, let's say, moral authority in the world. But it means also to do something to improve the poverty, the situation in the world, including, as I said, environment, and to have a dialogue, inter-ethnic and inter-religious dialogue. European Union should be here a front player, and this is my view of the Europe in forthcoming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Kwasniewski.
Thank you. Dear friends, my task mentioned in the document is to speak about implications for the business community, and I prepared some remarks, very short remarks, and then I would like to react to some important issues mentioned by my friends Pat Cox and Janez Drnovsek. First, I think our discussion, we should concentrate not only around business community, but much more about business and political elites, because that is a really interesting and good task for such conferences or meetings as in Davos, to organize thinking and feelings of elites, of political and economic elites. First, what I feel myself, because I'm one of Davos veterans, that the atmosphere changed very much. The last 7-10 years, we were much more optimistic, enthusiastic, and many of problems looked as easy and fantastic to solve in very short time. Today, it's necessary to say that the world is much more different from what it was 15 years ago, before the collapse of Berlin Wall, and is very much different from what it was 3 years ago, before September 11th. Because the main elements of this new situation is less security, more risks, more difficult choices to make. So we have more complications, we have more difficulties in front of us, and maybe now we know about these difficulties much more as before, because they existed before as well. Markets, the second remark, markets are very much different from what they were before the financial crisis of the emerging markets and before the financial scandals, which is necessary to mention too, like Enron or recently Parmalat. Public confidence is shaken. There is much more distrust about the market. Next remark. Europe of 25 will be very much different from the European Union 15. Not only more numerous, but also with more problems to be solved internally, as well as facing more conflicting interests. All of us will have to meet serious challenges. European elites must be able to find a new balance that could satisfy the needs of both the highly productive but inadequately innovative and dynamic western part of the Union and the dynamic but inadequately productive eastern part. In the absence of such balance, the future of the European Union will be never-ending quarrel bearing no fruits. Next remark, the European CEOs should be prepared for more competition, more challenges, but also more opportunities. The ability to manage the change should be one of their key qualifications. They need to think and act in the pan-European dimension, pan-European meaning, not only the European Union of 25. Economic reunification of the continent is the biggest opportunity for European companies to become globally more competitive and dynamic. Eastern enlargement of the European Union may be a problem for politicians or union leaders, but for business, it means nothing but potential advantage. Making Europe more competitive and at the same time economically sounder and more self-confident requires an effort on the part of political and economic elites. European CEOs should try to exploit fully the benefits of the reunification of the continent to make their companies more dynamic, with a more dynamic economy, more transparent markets and more business-friendly regulations. European companies will be able to meet any global competition, and I'm absolutely sure that it will happen. And now some remarks to these prospects of European Union. I think it's more or less what Pat Cox said, that we have problems, but we have unique opportunities. In my opinion, enlargement, that is this one of the biggest opportunities for all of us, sometimes not fully recognized by the politicians, elites and people of 15. Because we have huge market, almost 500 million people. We have really united Europe or unification of Europe, which is a chance to change this situation of artificial split after Second World War. And we have a new dynamism which is coming from new countries. Second, this integrated new Europe of 25, 27, 28, that is difficult to discuss about the number, but creates a chance to have really European politics, European security politics, European foreign policy, to organize new elements of real integrity of the continent, much more as before. And I think enlargement as such is a chance and is not only a problem. And if I see some real problems and challenges in front of us next years, I would like to mention only such, very important, but of course I would like to speak about these problems very brief. Constitutional treaty. I think it's important for Europe to have constitutional treaty. And if we have problems, that I think is a problem that this constitutional treaty for new countries, such as Poland, came, how we want to describe, too early or too late. Because for us it would be much easier to accept constitutional treaty prepared by 5 years ago, 6 years ago, or one day, but before enlargement. But if we decided to enlarge European Union by new 10 countries, was necessary to organize time for discussion, for public debate, for everything what can organize a very democratic approach to this crucial, this fundamental document. I remember the idea of convention led by Giscard, that this convention and this job is against lack or deficit of democracy into European Union. But the final result and the procedures used by convention, it was a deepening of this deficit of democracy and not the change of the situation. Because new countries started to discuss about the document absolutely unknown before. And we decided in the referendum, Pat Cox was very active in our Polish referendum. We appreciated very much. He helped us very much in some, especially rural places with this strong Irish experience and European experience. But we discussed about Nice rules. We discussed about Nice Treaty, about Maastricht Treaty, Amsterdam Treaty, but we didn't discuss about constitutional treaty prepared next month by the convention. So I think that is a problem of procedures, but this is the problem of democratic debate in European Union. How to use, how to take, how to include the people to such discussions which are so important for all of us and are going only and are leading only by leaders and elites. I think we have a chance with Irish presidency in European Union to finish this job. If not, I think it's not a drama to see this discussion till end of this year and maybe even longer. I'm sure that we have enough power and we have enough determination to prepare good constitutional treaty and to organize real majority support for constitutional treaty in all European countries or the countries of European Union. Second point, important, is this European policy of security and SDP and defense. So I think we should develop this concept. It's important, but we should develop this concept with two conditions. First, it cannot be against transatlantic ties and against United States because that is a very unclever concept. And second, if you want in Europe, and I'm deeply convinced that we need such European policy, we should not only discuss about this policy, but to use and to organize all instruments to have this effective policy of defense and security. When I see Europe such weak as during Balkans crisis, not ready to discuss and to change the situation in Belarus, not enough ready to change the situation in Moldova, not ready to take responsibility for some negative phenomena in some other places in our continent. I don't speak about the world, I speak about the continent. It means that practically we are not prepared to have and to fulfill real policy, European policy of defense and security. This situation we should change and we can change. But it means instruments, it means more money, it means more money in our budgets for European forces, and it means not only to discuss but to realize this idea, not against the United States, but with the good cooperation and with the framework of very good transatlantic ties. Third point is further enlargement. I think the doors to the European Union should be open not only for Croatia, what is quite obvious, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, what is not so obvious, but in my opinion is a very important issue. But we should see this eastern part of Europe as well. Ukraine, Moldova, Western Balkans. Maybe that is not today to speak when it would be possible to invite these countries to European Union. Maybe 10 years, that is not enough time. But to have these countries very close in the cooperation with European structures is necessary if we want to have united continent, if we want to have a real integration. And in my opinion, if we will not do such moves vis-à-vis these countries, we'll have very soon divided Europe again. By rules, by Schengen, and by a very serious concept of Russia to reorganize this area of Russian influence in former Soviet states. What is not official politics, but we can see such intentions quite visible. And last point is European solidarity, and I think that is what, in my opinion, is the main problem for Europe of 25 and a Europe of 15, and what is a real problem for Europe after this enthusiasm of collapse of communism, Soviet Union, unification of Germany. I think we have lack of this European solidarity. We have lack of confidence. And I was, after my discussion with Chancellor Schroeder, one day before Brussels summit when we discussed Constitution Treaty, asked by President Rao, tell me briefly, what is the real problem? Why we are not ready to find compromise and to make something positive? Well, how to find such very brief answer? And my answer was very brief, because that is a lack of confidence. Because we think that Germans and French, they want to have more power and they want to dictate some rules in Europe.
The French superpower.
Yes, well. And of course, why in Germany and France they have such problems with us, with Spain and Poland? Because they think that we want to use our votes not to accelerate the processes, to establish some new issues in Europe, but to make veto. And I think in such situation, if we have such real lack of European solidarity and European confidence, that is the problem, how to solve all these problems. Of course, last year, 2003 was extremely difficult for Europe because of many reasons, starting with Iraq and reactions on Iraq, that is true. But now we have time to re-establish this atmosphere of confidence, of discussion, of looking for a good compromise, and to go back to the main idea which was the fundament of European Union at the beginning, solidarity. Solidarity, what in Poland sounds very special, but what should be important word for Europe, for this new Europe, which to some extent I represent, but I'm very much against the description of Secretary Rumsfeld, because I was asked many times, especially by my French and German friends, Poland is really this new Europe. I said, no, we are a very old Europe, very traditional Europe, and we are new members of the European Union. But if you want to see Krakow or some places in Poland, you know that we are very old Europe, very traditional, sometimes maybe too traditional.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zumwinkel, now you have to, I don't know if you want what you want to add to all this, but after solidarity, maybe competition?
That's a key word I would like to address here with so prominent politicians at this panel. I'm quite confident that Europe has an attractive long-term future, despite all present problems we have. Just look at the bright young people coming out of the universities of London, Krakow, Munich or Milano. And I studied in the United States, I worked there, I have already 40,000 people working there for my company, and they can cook also only with water. What will Europe look like in the next 10 years? I expect in the business arena, it will be a complete free trade zone, and there's a lot of work to do. The free movement of labor, goods, services and capital, there's still a lot to do. Yes, constitutions, but the day-to-day work our politicians and our bureaucracy in Brussels has to do is to really complete this free trade zone. In the last 10 years, we had 20% increase of the trade between the countries. And we know since Adam Smith that that increases the wealth of the nations. And my company is transporting 5% of world trade and 16% in Europe. So I'm very eager to have that in the future that goes on. On the political dimension, well, if I look in, I feel as a European, but in my country where I was born, in Germany, it took 100 years to unify Germany. In Italy, it took 60 or 80 years. So it takes long. So in 10 years, we will make some progress, we will have a constitution, etc., etc. But I urge everybody to look a little bit longer and to be more patient. What place will Europe hold within the global system? In the triad, Asia, North America, and Europe? In business, I think we have a wonderful situation. I mean, 450 million people with the accession countries, attractive markets, higher growth rates. Some countries more, we have 500 million. I expect a more and more homogeneous market for us. So for businessmen, it's very attractive. Yes, everybody is talking about China, 1,200 billion, GDP. But just look at my little Germany. I mean, that's half. Yeah, 9% growth rate is nice, but 2% growth rate for all over Europe. I mean, that's big. Yeah. And we as businessmen, we just look at the sheer numbers, not at other things. In the political dimension, I think the duty of the politician is to guarantee the main end product a politician has to produce, that is peace. And the EU has produced wonderful peace situation in Europe, not so much at the neighborhoods in Europe, Yugoslavia. And I think the end product, the next 10 years, what we expect from business, is peace, not only in Europe, but however you define neighborhood, so to say. And for that, it was already talked about, we need an intervention force to do that. And everybody is trying to do that. Now in Germany, last week, they announced it. So that is the main thing. And as businessmen, we love peace more maybe than anybody else. I mean, our airplane was shot down in Iraq 4 weeks ago. So, I mean, so we know what that means to have no peace. Then the third question, what kind of Europe does business want? So I start with business, economics. We want a 100% liberalized and free market, like in the US. All barriers removed. And in services, in transportation, there are still so many monopolies around. Well, I was postmaster, so I know what I'm talking about. Now it's 1/3 of my business, so we now have 400,000 people worldwide. No investment hurdles, etc., etc., etc. So everybody, I think, agrees on that. Not everybody, but the huge majority. What do we expect from the politicians? Well, my personal opinion, and I think the majority of the CEOs in Europe, they don't expect harmonization. Everything is the same, from Ireland to Warsaw. Be it, well, you all know these examples. That is a monopoly for politicians and for bureaucracies. That would be a growth segment. Let's harmonize everything. I think the better recipe is let's have competition. And I think, and therefore I'm also positive, it's starting. The new tax regimes in Eastern Europe, even in Austria. Why is Germany moving on the tax thing? Because there's competition. So let's compete for the best system. And like some businessmen and many of the politicians, they don't like competition. One tax system versus the other. Or in education. My 2 children are studying in London because I think the German education system is not so good. So I advise them to go to business arena there. So let's have competition in education. Let's have competition in labor regimes. The unions are learning fast these days in Europe. And therefore, that creates wealth for our nations. My summary is, in a businessman language, we have to increase the market share of the liberalized parts of our economies. A bigger market share in this. And there are lots, you know, in the old style and old fashion. And we have to introduce more competitive spirit to do that. And I'm positive because we were successful to eliminate, you know, the communist planned system. And in Eastern Germany and your countries, I mean, you know what these systems have done, you know, not just to the wealth of a nation, but to human beings, etc., etc. And we overcame that with a silent revolution, people walking on the streets of life, and then suddenly it collapsed. So therefore, we did a lot in the past, and therefore I'm optimistic for Europe in the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel there's almost, at this stage, but the challenger might change, is some form of consensus that Europe could be better, but probably could be worse. We do have peace. That it's work in progress and will stay so probably for more than 10 years. Now, if you want to challenge this assessment, please feel free.
It seems foolish to try to challenge that. In fact, I find myself in a very odd situation. I'm supposed to be the challenger, but if so, I think I've been put on the wrong panel because, for one thing, I also may just say I think that an American comment at this point is superfluous and unnecessary and probably not even desirable because all of the panelists, who I have great respect for, have taken a very sober look, it seems to me, at Europe's situation. And I don't know that there's a great deal that an outsider, an American, can add to it. Let me just say then that for myself, I would like to be very optimistic about Europe. I would like to convince most of my countrymen, including some in the present administration, that the United States has enormous interest in a very healthy and very strong Europe, strong not only economically and competitively. And by the way, I don't work for any corporation, don't hold any stock in American corporations, so it's easy for me to say that Europe should be more competitive economically, but that's what I believe. And I would also wish for a Europe that can improve its military capacities, and not only as a partner for the United States, which I do value greatly, but also for Europe's own sake. I think it's very important. So rather than challenge, let me just outline what I think is a predicament, however, based on all of your very fine analysis, which I think is correct, the predicament that we are both going to be facing over the next 10 years. I agree that Europe is not going to significantly strengthen itself relative to the United States, at least over the next decade. In fact, I fear that the gap between American military capabilities, to choose one issue, and European capabilities is going to widen even more enormously than it already has. And I want to emphasize that the gap that opened up between the United States and Europe opened up in the 1990s, really, more than anything else. That a lot of what we saw in Kosovo was a consequence of that gap, a lot of what we've seen more recently. And that, you know, with Europe in the phase that it's in economically, I would say not only is there not going to be an increase in European defense spending on average, probably there'll be a decrease. I wish I could say that what is spent will be spent more efficiently. I'm not totally optimistic that that will in fact be the case, because there are social issues, domestic economic issues that make it very hard for nations to transform their military in the absence of a perceived need to do so. And I think that is a key element here. I do not believe that Europeans, the public in general, not necessarily the leaders at this table, but I do not believe the publics in general believe that they are sufficiently threatened by anything, including the United States, to want to take great action to not only spend more on defense, but also to take the necessary steps to reform it. So I don't see in the future a great deal of improvement on the military front. Now, how important is that? Well, how important is that depends entirely on what you think the world is going to look like 10 years from now or over the next 10 years. I think that if we are going to see a world that is largely at peace, a world where economics are the most important issues and military issues are not the most important issues, then Europe stands a very good chance of being, in fact, a very important player on the world scene. If, on the other hand, you see the next 10 years being one of increasing risk in the security sphere, increasing difficulties, and not just the war on terrorism, which I think sometimes we think that's the only thing that, sometimes we Americans think that's the only thing that's going on in the world, and it's not. There are other security challenges, not just weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, but also coming instabilities, I believe, in East Asia and possibly elsewhere. So if you believe that the world in 10 years is going to be at least as concerned with military security issues as it is now, and possibly more so, then Europe's incapacity on the military front is going to be a problem. It's going to pose a predicament for both the United States and for Europeans. I hear this panel saying, and I've heard this from senior European officials, and I take it very seriously, I'm one never to bet against the European Union or the European project. I think that's a bad bet. But how much time Europe needs to get together and move forward, I agree with the assessment of this panel that it will be at least 10 years, if not more, for Europe to begin to accomplish the objectives that it wants to in the foreign and defense area. The problem is the world doesn't stand still while Europe gets its act together. The world continues, and I wonder how Europeans are going to feel if the reality is, over the next decade and perhaps beyond, Europe lacks the capacity to have serious influence on security and military issues, if they are still left in the position, what I like to call the unipolar predicament, if they are still left in the position where only the United States has the capacity to act in many situations, and I'm not talking about peacekeeping and humanitarian missions, I'm talking about the use of hard power in critical situations, is this something that Europeans can tolerate or should tolerate? I have great sympathy for European concerns of letting any great power, whether it's the United States, which I think most Europeans agree is a better choice than most, better than China, better than Russia, but nevertheless it's unnerving to have one single power with all that military capacity and really calling the shots in the world. I think Europeans have already expressed great discomfort with that condition over the Iraq War. I think there are other crises that lie ahead of us where Europeans are going to be very uncomfortable with a situation where the United States is driving alone and the Europeans can't be sure whether it's driving in a good direction or in a bad direction. So I would say, not as a challenger, but perhaps as a challenge to Europe, which I know that all of you share, that it's very important that Europe takes seriously not just its economic capabilities, but also its ability to wield power in the international system. I can say as an American, I would be very grateful to see a stronger Europe in whatever guise it wants to be in NATO, outside of NATO. I would prefer that it be in NATO, but I would welcome a stronger Europe in any case. So I just, you are the national leaders of this continent, and I wish you the best of luck in that task.
Thank you. You have not broken the consensus. No.
I apologize.
No, but I think it's welcome, because I think we tend sometimes to create controversies where, in fact, there is no basis for such controversy, and sometimes I feel some debates I read about are completely artificial on both sides, if I may say so.
Absolutely.
Okay, I suggest, as there is some sort of consensus on this side, that we go to the democracy part of our session. There were 3 planned questions by the organizers. I will ask you only to answer 2, because the 3rd one is short-term. It's only about business climate in 204. We did not address it, and I don't think it's interesting to debate it. So there are 2 votes. One is on Europe and the economy. The panel is not allowed to vote, which is complete democracy. You are allowed to say, to answer the question which is on the screen, and you may answer either A, B, C. I don't know what I would answer, but I look forward to seeing the answer of the participants. So you have to press one of the 3 buttons according to you. Dear me, as I have no apparatus, 1, 2, 3 means ABC, which is one of the complexity of international relations.
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. Okay? Vote ended? Fair. It's reflects a bit the lack of confidence President Kwasniewski recognized, but it's more glass half empty, glass half full, which was the general climate of the panel. So it appears the consensus extends on this to the floor. The second question hopefully will lead to a clear answer. The enlargement of the EU in May 2004 will either 1, strengthen, B, 2, weaken, C, not have an effect. Vote. Vote finished.
Yeah.
Results.
Oh.
Huh. So, there again, the consensus with the panel. So either it means everybody agreed at the start, or that the panel has been very convincing up to now. But still, now you are invited to question any member of the panel on the issues which were addressed or other issues you feel of interest. Raise your hand if you wish to receive a microphone, which will arrive immediately.
Yes, Jean-Louis Gergorin, European Aeronautic and Defense and Space Company. I would like to slightly challenge the challenger, and in the sense that I am more optimistic than you are about the evolution of Europe concerning the necessity to do more for its defense. My company has been conducting a survey for the last 4 years in the 4 major countries which are in which we have business, which are France, Germany, UK, and Spain. And there has been a constant evolution, especially after 9/11, in a sense of a steady but absolutely regular increase of support for defense. And for the last 2 years, for the first time, there's a majority of people who are in favor of either maintaining or increasing the defense spending in the 4 countries. And there is also a majority of people who are in favor of supporting a stronger industrial and technological basis, and a majority of people who are in favor of solidarity with the NATO partners, not only European partners, but NATO partners, of power projection in order to have peacekeeping, to fight terrorism, etc. There are some differences, by the way, that are rather strange, that you may be of interest to you. But although the British are obviously the most supportive of bigger defense spending, you know, they are also those who show the less solidarity. They are the people who are the most less inclined to fight for others. You know, they want to spend more for defense, but mainly for British interest. So it's just a point of information. But what I want to say that one of the bizarre but very positive consequences of the rift of last year on Iraq has been a consensus between the feuding countries of France and Germany on one side and UK on the other side to do more in terms of acceleration of European defense. Also, I believe that even if we are unable to do the kind of radical transformation of our forces that would be necessary, we are aware that we have to change from a Cold War deployments. And the recent decisions by the German Minister of Defense are very positive to go towards a better and more efficient defense in Germany. And a similar decision has been taken previously in France and in UK. So overall, I believe I would be more optimistic than you are in terms of Europe to play its role in the defense field. I would be less optimistic concerning the knowledge industry, which the knowledge leadership of Europe, it is another issue.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on these remarks?
Well, just to say, I certainly hope that you're right. you know, in the American polling I'm familiar with on various issues is people say that they would like a lot of things, but then when it comes to voting in political elections, they don't necessarily vote and compel their politicians to do that. I feel, I could be wrong, that we're, you know, it seems to me that France and Germany in particular are going to be under some budget pressures, and that when you're under budget pressures, it's very difficult to increase military spending at the same time that you're trying to cut other things. That's true in any country. And I get back to the basic point, which is, by the way, if your polls are right, please, I hope that that's true, and I wish that that should be true. My suspicion, however, is that nations build military capacities for basically one of two reasons. One is that they feel directly threatened. The other is that they have great ambitions to use their military power on the global scene. It seems to me both those are lacking in Europe right now, but as I say, nothing would make me happier than for that to be wrong.
Pat Cox, you wanted to make a comment on this.
It's a very brief anecdote. I find the material you speak of extremely interesting. A brief anecdote from European Parliament. Chris Patton was leading a debate one afternoon on behalf of the Commission. I was in the chair. The debate was well attended. It was about security and defence policy. And anecdotally, and it illustrates something, he said, hands up, those of you who would be willing this weekend to go back to your constituency, to a public audience, and say, let's spend more on defence. One hand went up. That was the hand of l'ancien général Philippe Marion.
Okay, a question there.
Hi, I'm Paul Hodge, Director of the Harvard Generations Policy Program, and also editor of the Harvard Generations Policy Journal. One of the things that's going to be happening to Europe, as our research shows, in the next 10 years is that your populations are going to age significantly. And you all have been talking about a very rosy picture in terms of economic growth, but there's been no discussion as to the effects upon the aging on your population, of your populations, on your economic growth. And I was wondering what your comments would be on that.
Pat Cox.
Very briefly, for my part, whenever we discuss this famous Lisbon agenda, you got one of the headline goals about knowledge-based economy. But a big part of the structural reform agenda within that is to look at demographics and their public financial implications. And indeed, already in the debates in France, Germany and Italy, where these demographics are now real and present, and where they're impacting and will continue to deepen their impact on public budgets, these are the very hard, front-end, difficult, short to medium-term policy adjustments that are being discussed and debated with, if I may use the phrase in the European model, social partners and in society. And it's very difficult politics, of course, to say you've got to work longer and that we pay less pensions some way. But I think one of the characteristics is that we are heading into that, and it is in our Lisbon agenda, but it gets lost under the wider headline. I don't know that we've gone wide enough in terms of scope and deep enough in terms of ambition yet to have answered that. And a second brief point, if I could say, I think we in Europe who spend a lot of time talking about border security issues and looking at flows of migration need to start having the positive debate about positive migration flows to connect to ageing societies and economies. And that's a debate that awaits some policy leadership, because we've been more looking at closing doors than opening opportunities on migration.
If I may make on this issue a personal comment, it's very difficult for a politician or political leader of any kind to address the demographic issue as long as unemployment is very high. In fact, people see aging as a short-term relief to unemployment. Of course, this is not a good long-term view, but if I see the attitude in my country, everybody waits for the baby boomers to retire so that unemployment falls. And probably this issue of demographics will be addressed, maybe a bit too late, but it will be addressed once the issue of unemployment is not at the top of the agenda of most political leaders. Until then, it's a bit difficult to explain.
So, very short remarks. I think absolutely is one of the crucial questions for the future in Europe. That's the problem even among new members of European Union. The demographic structure in our country is a little bit better. We have more youth, children, but still the problem is the same. And I think it's necessary to discuss the problem of pensions, of unemployment, and what is absolutely extremely important, and I would like to mention what Pat Cox said, we should change this discussion about immigration. Because in longer term, the problem of immigration is a problem for my country too. And psychologically, the people is not prepared. Even now we have each day more than 1 million workers from the East. But that is officially, unofficially, but this process is going. And I think the task for the politicians is open public debate about this necessity in the next some years, even less than 10 years.
President Drnovsek?
One sentence. The aging population in Europe. This is certainly at the moment one of the priorities of politics in European countries. And this is also the reason why defense spending will not be increased in 10 years, not significantly. Because we all think that this is more difficult and more important problem than perhaps a threat that is possible, but not very we are not so sure that it will come. Perhaps it will never come. So, but we have to address this kind of problems as aging population first as a priority, and then other priorities will come.
Monsieur Pujol. The mic is coming.
Yes, I want to insist in this question because I have always been very surprised that this subject is not discussed in meetings like this one, no, usually, no. And when it is discussed only from the point of view of aging and of pensions. But there is another problem, that is the loss of population. Europe is the only continent who is losing population, and very quickly. Not only from the point of view of percentage, when we make the comparison with Asia, with Africa, Southern America, Northern United States. But this is also losing population from the point of view of absolute figures. During the next 30, 40 years, if you have not a very strong change in the trend, Europe will lose 40, 50, 60 million people. And that is even from the economic point of view, really that will have very, very, very serious consequences. No? Well, that is not only a question of aging, I repeat, loss of population. It is very difficult to take decisions for increasing the birth rate. I understand that very well, no? But in any case, that is a great danger that we have, aging and loss of population.
Thank you. Yeah, Pat.
Brief comment, and it's from what Jordi Pujol has said about a number of the one of them then about population trends, fertility rates, net rates of reproduction, which in fact are negative. But another issue, in our labour market, we're adding already to the age dependency, which is in your question directly, by a labour market policy which particularly for men, active still in age, healthy still, but between 55 and 64, I remember preparing some data for a speech I gave to the German BDI conference in Berlin a few months ago. In Germany today, only 38% of men in that age category are at work, because all the incentive systems are to get out early. So it is in fact a double dependency, and it is a dumb, in social terms, dumb incentive process that causes people to retire earlier in a system already looking at the public financial consequences of an ageing population. And those incentive disincentives need radical overhauling to encourage people in a rational way to choose, if they're fit to do so, to actually stay on in the labour force.
Are there other questions from the audience? Yes? A microphone is coming on your right.
Thank you very much. My name is Rozłucki from Poland. the Warsaw Stock Exchange. If we are talking about Europe, there are inevitable comparisons with the US. Similar number of population, and yet we are struck always with diversity in Europe. Many countries, many languages. Do you view this as a difficulty for European economic success or a source of richness that will drive progress? I have no good answer on that, because definitely there are costs. Even if we watch the Brussels meetings, there are so many interpreters needed. There are obvious costs, but yet if we watch Europe throughout centuries, this cultural language diversity has produced good results. So what do you see the future? Less diversity, more homogeneity among the European nations, and if yes or no, whether that will be good for Europe or bad?
Klaus?
Having more than 100 or so nationalities in my company, I think diversity is a plus, a really strong plus. And we learn from this corporate culture, how we call it in the business world, and then we transfer to another country. And for Europe, I think this kind of competition between good ideas coming from this country or that country, or from southern Germany and eastern Germany, that will really enrich Europe. I'm really convinced about that. I could give examples. And we have several headquarters, so to say, and we are not going to have one streamlined, monopolized headquarter and dictate everything what has to happen. Because with our technology today, with the brightness of the people, it's better to have free flow of information and a free spirit to compete, even within a company. We call it then divisional structures, etc., transfer price system, internal price mechanisms, etc. And I think that would be also good all over Europe. And therefore, I think that is one of the strengths compared to the United States. Yes, you can move in the United States, within 48 hours, you find the same kitchen, in the house, at the other side of the country. That we will not find in Europe if somebody moves from Madrid to Munich.
Well, you find your McDonald's everywhere.
Yeah, okay.
Take it easy.
So, but these ideas, and this will produce creativity. So, in summary, I think that's the strength.
If I may add one word, I fully share what Klaus said about diversity being a strength. I do think that we do have a weakness, is that we do not have a common language to communicate. I do believe that if everybody in Europe mastered his own language and a lingua franca, which quite evidently is English, communication would be easier. I mean, I don't think that easy communication goes against cultural diversity. And on the reverse, I think not being able to communicate makes mastering the riches of cultural diversity more difficult.
Louis, I now talk to my French managers in English, and the Estonians, I mean, they speak, I don't know exactly, 60% English.
No, you're already far ahead. Some of us in France are not as advanced as you are.
But you are very fast.
President Kwasniewski.
Mr. Rozłucki knows Polish history very well, and I think we are a very good example what means to have a very diverse community and homogeneous community. Before Second World War, Poland was one of the most multinational countries in Europe. Then, because of Nazis, of Holocaust, of Stalin, change of the borders, we started to be one of the most homogeneous countries in Europe. And of course, for richness of our culture, of tradition, of everything, this Polish melting pot before the war, during hundreds of years, was fantastic and gave a lot of fantastic results in literature, in the poets, in music, in everything. So I'm sure that this diversity of Europe is our richness. And I don't afraid so much about this language because it's coming. This lingua franca will be used by more and more young generation, by majority of people. And please understand, we have these new technologies, this what we can observe here. It will help us to communicate better. What is really the problem? The diversity creates some tensions as well. And if diversity means dialogue, compromise, tolerance, that is very good, that's very positive. Diversity is soil for nationalism, xenophobia, intolerance. That is the problem and can create a lot of problems. So I think that is this point which we should discuss and react if we will see all these phenomena as intolerance or xenophobia. So, but diversity is a real richness, maybe the biggest richness of Europe in this global world this and next centuries.
Thank you. President Tomtek?
I was so surprised that you gave up so easily the French language.
I can speak French with you, but with very few here.
So the Slovenian language, I will not now put it on the table as a choice, but it is here too. Complexity can be advantage, European complexity and diversity. It's not easy. It demands, as Aleksander said, a lot of patience, tolerance, and dialogue. But this can be an advantage. We live even in a more complex world than EU is complex. And to manage this complex world, I think we will need all these European practices and dialogue and what we will do between ourselves to also to spread this further. And the model, European model, I think, can be followed by the others in the future, and it can be very important. And diversity it's here. We cannot avoid it. It's richness. It should be and must be a richness, and we have to accept it.
So I think we might conclude by these few words. I will just say the general conclusion is Europe is work in progress, which is encouraging and which means we have a lot to do ahead of us. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to everybody.